This module is not necessarily focused on one or two or three specific objectives of the Security Plus exam, although the knowledge gained in this module will be helping you understand several of those objectives. But it's to lay a foundation for the course, to get a shared vocabulary. So in this module, which is one of the shorter modules of the course, we're going to actually go into some definitions and gain an understanding. For example, for security itself, what is security? What do we mean by InfoSec? What do we mean by cybersecurity? All of these different terms that seem to float around within the security industry. Making sure you understand our meaning for those terms will help you to understand everything we cover throughout this course. Now, in addition, we're going to cover some fundamental principles, things that come up again and again within the learning experience when people are studying security. Things like CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and AAA, authentication, authorization, and accounting. So we'll understand these concepts and why they keep coming up and why they're important when it comes to security. Finally, in this module, we will understand why it's important that you have security awareness at the forefront of everything you do, not only as a security practitioner, but as a concept that you deliver to your users to help them understand the importance of security in operations day to day. So we're going to cover all of this right here. Let's begin by defining security itself. Security is defined in the Oxford Languages Dictionary as the state of being free from danger or threat. So if you have security, according to this definition, you're free from danger or threat. There is no danger, there is no threat. However, in the world of digital security, it's hard to say we're free from danger or threat. So I want to massage this definition just a little bit and define security as the state of minimal danger or threat. And this is a really good definition of security in the information technology world. Our focus is not usually on completely eradicating any possibility of an attack, but rather of diminishing the likelihood of an attack or minimizing the severity of an attack should it occur. That's our focus. The simple reason is we need to be connected to the world. And by the fact that we're connected to the world through email and telephone systems and internet access and so forth, we have to have some level of openness to receive an email, to access a website, to make a phone call. That level of openness means there will always be some level of vulnerability. But what we want to do is minimize that vulnerability. And we do that through security technologies and through education. So we can say then that security is the state of minimal danger or threat. So what is this thing called InfoSec? Well, InfoSec is really just a portmanteau of information and security. We put those two words together and we come up with InfoSec. So it's information security. It's the security of your information. Now, if we think about information security, then we're talking about securing our data, specifically the bits and bytes of that which we generate from our applications. Well, in order to secure the information, we have to often secure the hardware that it's stored on, the networks that it traverses across, and so forth. So InfoSec ends up encompassing pretty much all of security for many people. And we also have this other term called cyber security. Cyber is just that which relates to computers or technology, right? So if we think of cyber as meaning that, then cybersecurity is security related to computers and technology. Some people differentiate between cybersecurity and InfoSec. Some people blur them together. For the purposes of the exam, you don't really have to worry about the differences. But it is important to note one interesting thing, and that is that cyber tends to focus more on the hardware, and info tends to focus more on the data bits. And so you can think of them as different things, but in reality, they've blurred together over the last several decades. Now, interestingly, the concept of cyber has come into play a lot in recent years with the use of the phrase cyber physical. Cyber physical has to do with taking these real-world physical machines and connecting them digitally. So maybe we have a cutting machine, or we have a bottling machine, or heating and ventilation, or anything like that. and we connect it to the network, making it a cyber physical entity. The thing still exists in the real world, but it somehow integrates with the digital world, and we might be able to control it or monitor it through that digital interconnection. This introduces yet another need for security, and we see this a lot in the realm of the Internet of Things. So our definition of security for our purposes here, and this will become so important as we go along with managing risk, is the state of minimal danger or threat. Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about a fundamental security concept that comes up again and again when you study the security literature, and that is something we call CIA, or sometimes AIC. CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, this is something that's very important to understand because it gives you some concepts that you need to employ throughout your security planning, implementation, and maintenance, and so forth. So let's define each of these three terms, and we'll use the ISC squared definitions as they're highly respected. They're the creators of the CISSP certification. Now, the definition of confidentiality is preserving authorized restrictions on information access and disclosure, including means for protecting personal privacy and proprietary information. So confidentiality is all about making sure that the information is disclosed only to the people to whom it should be disclosed. We're not allowing people to access the information that shouldn't have access to the information. As long as we're doing that, our data has confidentiality. Our information has confidentiality. So confidentiality is important, and there are many things that we use to implement confidentiality. For example, authentication and authorization are used. We validate someone's identity, and then we decide whether they're allowed to access it or not, right? We can use encryption. So in addition to the fact that we have authenticated and authorized people, we can encrypt the data so that if someone finds another way into the data store, well, if they don't have the keys, they still can't get access to that information. We've maintained confidentiality. The definition of integrity, according to ISC squared, is guarding against improper information modification or destruction, and includes ensuring information non-repudiation and authenticity. So integrity says it is what it's supposed to be. Now here's the way I always like to explain this. Integrity is about something being what it should be and not losing that state, right? So if we say a person has integrity, we say they are always who they are. We usually think of integrity as a positive thing, but someone can have integrity about being bad. They're always bad. They have integrity in that. They're consistent, right? Think about the world of chemistry. If you take two chemicals and put them together, and they do not explode or evaporate, they can maintain state when they're joined together, we say that that chemical mixture has integrity. It doesn't lose its state, right? So if we think about those analogies as we look at integrity related to our data, our information, our computer security, then what we're saying is we need to be able to ensure the data is not improperly modified. It's not changed to a state it shouldn't have. That's not to say it can't be changed, but it can't be changed to a state that it should not possess. Someone can't modify it if they're not allowed to modify it. They can't delete it if they're not allowed to delete it, and so forth. So that's integrity. Now, it also then includes this concept of non-repudiation. Non-repudiation means I cannot repudiate an action. If I am the person that is logged as having changed the data, there should be some level of certainty that that was me that actually changed the data. And this comes back to our authentication processes and authorization processes and all of it coming together to make sure that that actually works. So that's integrity. Now, the third element in CIA is availability. Availability is defined by ISC squared as ensuring timely and reliable access to information by authorized users. So we're making sure that the people who need access to information can access the information, when they need access to the information, how they need access to the information, and from where they need access to the information. So for example, we might say that information is available appropriately, but you have to be in the work building, on the work network to access it. There's no access to it from the internet or from the outside world, right? So available does not necessarily mean always available from everywhere for everyone, but it's available to the person who needs it, how they need it, when they need it, and from where they need it. And as long as we've accomplished that, we can say that we've accomplished availability. So this concept of the CIA then gives you these fundamental principles that you can be thinking about as you're looking at all security technologies. You can ask, how does it help to achieve confidentiality, or does it hinder confidentiality? How does it help to achieve integrity or hinder it? How does it help to achieve availability or hinder it? And this then becomes a great conceptual tool for us to think about the security solutions that we use. There's another fundamental concept that comes up again and again when studying the literature on security, and that is AAA. AAA stands for Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting. So before we talked about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and one of the ways that we help to achieve confidentiality is by implementing AAA. It's also one of the ways that we help to achieve integrity. You see, authentication is defined as the validation of a claimed identity. So if I claim I'm Tom, I need some way to prove that to the system. One way we do that is that some point at some time, Tom was known to be the person who was creating a password for an account associated with Tom. So when Tom logs in and uses that password, we trust that that really is Tom. So passwords are a method of authenticating the claimed identity or validating the claimed identity. Now, in addition, I can use things like biometrics and smart cards and other things that we'll talk about elsewhere in the course. So authentication is the validation of a claimed identity by any user. Now, this user, remember, could be a person or it could be a machine. It will still have a user account, we think of it as, to access the resources. The second term in AAA is authorization. We'll go back to ISC squared for this definition. They define it as the process of defining the specific resources a user needs and determining the type of access to those resources the user may have. So authorization is built on the layer of authentication. We're assuming that we have validated the claimed identity. We're assuming we know this really is Tom. And now we're going to the next level and saying, what is Tom allowed to do? Now, authorization can actually take on two conceptual roles. One is what you can access, and the other is what you can do. And what I mean by that is when we think of files and folders, and even entire machines or computers on the network, we think of them as servers. We tend to think of, what can I access? Can I access that server at all? Once I'm into the server, can I access all the folders or just some of them? Once I'm into a folder, can I access all the subfolders and files or just some of them? So what can I access? But the other question is, what can I do? Now, this partly has to do with access. So yes, I can access a file, but maybe I can only read it. Maybe I can only write to it. Maybe I can read and write. Maybe I can even delete it. Maybe I can give permissions to other people to access it as well. So what can I do? But what I can do goes beyond just the files and folders that I'm able to access and the database systems. It could also be, do I have the ability to launch a process? So maybe there's some process that can be executed on the network. Think of an IoT environment where we refresh all of our statistical data. Do I have the right to launch the process that refreshes all of our statistical data? Or is that not my right? I can only view the data that's there, but I can't restart it or refresh it. So we have the issue of permissions, the permissions I have with files and folders, and then sometimes rights, the right to do a certain thing on the network. And they can be intermingled and they can also be separated. But it's important to know that both of those concepts are there in relation to authorization. The final of the AAA is accounting, and that is really just defined as keeping records, in this case of actions against or upon our information and systems. So accounting, when we think of that generally, we think of people that keep financial records, right? They're keeping records. Well, within information security, when we talk about accounting, we're talking about keeping records of access. Who has accessed the data? What have they done to or with that data, and so forth? This is our accounting. We usually use the term logging within IT support for this, or audit trails, these types of things. They're all referring to the same basic concept of accounting. So we can implement authentication, authorization, and accounting in order to, at least in part, ensure confidentiality and integrity. And even in some ways, it's linked to availability, because if we have the appropriate authorization structure in place based on solid authentication, then someone would not be able to delete data, which would make it unavailable to other users, unless they really have the permissions, the capabilities to do that, right? And so we achieve more availability because we limit the number of people that can take the data away, and therefore we get better availability as well. So there are definitely interconnections among all of these things, but there are also key technologies we think of in association with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And of course, when it comes to confidentiality, authentication, authorization are absolute key, as well as encryption. And when it comes to integrity, accounting becomes key, as well as appropriate authorization configuration. So we're beginning our journey as we're looking here in Module 2 at the different security technologies that we can utilize and the concepts that impact our thinking about them. We do have one more concept that I want to talk about before we finish up this brief module, and that is the concept of security awareness. So we'll talk about that next. Security awareness. We hear this a lot these days. We want our users to be more security minded. We want them to have that security awareness. We need to have it too. It's important for us and our users. But what are we really talking about? Well, we've already defined security. We know that's the state of minimal danger or threat in relation to our computer systems and information. But what is security awareness really? Well, I think we need to look at this word aware or awareness. So the word aware means having or showing realization, perception, or knowledge. That's what it means to be aware. You have realization, you realize something. You have perception, you're identifying and noticing things. You have knowledge, the knowledge that allows you to have realization and perception. This means you're aware. So awareness is the state of realization, perception, and knowledge, in this case related to security. We want people to be in the state where they have the right knowledge so that they realize security is an issue and they perceive security threats. This is really the crux of security awareness, and we all need to have this mindset. Now, one way I like to explain how this works, when you get the knowledge, how it impacts your security awareness. The knowledge of security impacts your security awareness. Now, how does this work? Well, I like to use the example of the new car effect. What do I mean by that? Well, have you ever gotten a new car and then you notice once you have had it for a few weeks, you start to see that car everywhere? You notice it in the parking lots. You notice it on the car dealership lots. You notice it driving down the road. If it's the same color as your version of that car, you may even see someone else and say, hey, they're driving my car. You notice that car more. It seems like there is more of that car than there was before. Well, there's one more, the one you bought, but probably not that much more than there was just a few weeks ago. And yet you notice it more. Why is this happening? Because you possess it. You now possess it, and because you possess it, you're noticing it everywhere else. The same is true when it comes to security. The more knowledge we possess about security, and particularly about potential threats, the more likely we are to notice those threats taking place in our environment. Suspect behavior, odd computer symptoms, things that would indicate that maybe a security incident is occurring or has occurred. So this is what security awareness is all about. And it's one of the things you'll build very strongly as you go through this Security Plus training. You understand the threats and vulnerabilities, and you're also going to understand the security solutions. And with all of this understanding, even though you might not be an absolute expert in any of them, You'll have that awareness level mindset, which will make you a better information technology professional in general. And it's one of the reasons why at the start of this course, I said, I think that Security Plus or equivalent knowledge should be there for everyone who works with information technology. So build your security awareness, but also remember to help build your users' security awareness at the same time.